Right, so welcome to the session. So starting at 3 o'clock, we will have the talks on science communication, which Elizabeth is going to be leading. But this first session is about the two pathways in history of science, technology and medicine, for which I'm the program director. For those of you watching on the video, my name is James Sumner, and medical humanities, for which, there you go, come into shot, Carsten.
Am I in shock now?
Yeah, I think you are. So this is Dr Carsten Timmermann, who is the pathway coordinator for medical humanities.
We should say one of two pathway coordinators. My colleague Sarah Collins can't be here today.
Okay,
and I'll leave
the contact details for both Carsten and Sarah they're on the website. Okay, so what we usually start with these days, one of the things we're interested in on these courses is methods of communication and their relationship with the sciences. So we've picked out one of the favourite means of visual communication, which is the Venn diagram, which we use to explain the overlaps between the different programs. It's not very clear on your colour handouts, so I've done there's a big sort of whole page black and white version if you want a copy of that. This is just useful for people who are thinking, well, I might be interested in any of these programs. What are the differences between them? What are the similarities? The first thing to note is that they all share quite a bit of taught content. Okay, so there are some courses that you will all take together. There are some courses that are different, and yet they've got some shared classes. So the overlaps basically work like this. The History of Science, Technology and Medicine program does exactly what it says on the tin. It is a quite strongly historically focused program that goes into the histories of all of those fields. So it has plenty of content that is not biological, medical, or healthcare focused. It does include some things that we'll normally see in history. The history of science as a field goes into quite a lot of science policy studies, so looking at more contemporary developments in science, looking at how science is funded, how scientific institutions work. There's some overlap with the field of science and technology studies, which draws more on the social sciences, but it's a broadly historical program. The history of medicine and also the history of healthcare, nursing, patient relationships, everything like that, that is on both of these programs. The Medical Humanities program includes that and various other approaches to medicine and healthcare, which Carsten is going to talk about in more detail, but with quite a strong component from the creative arts. And then science communication, HSTM is, although you can go in various directions from that program, HSTM is more designed for research preparation. It's more concerned with the norms of humanities writing. Science communication is more vocational. So science communication deals more with those areas of practical employment in fields like copywriting, public relations, events organisation, and various other things. So the more contemporary stuff, the policy core, that's shared between HSTM and SciComm. So I'm the programme director for HSTM, as I say, and I've just got a few slides about things that we do on that programme. We try to make it as hands-on as possible. So this is a session at the John Rylands Library on Deansgate in the city centre. Has anybody been? Yeah, it's quite an impressive building, and it has got quite impressive things in it. It's got some very valuable rare book collections. So they've got a first edition copy of Isaac Newton's Principia, which is worth a few bob. These students here are looking at this is a first, isn't it, of Andreas Vesalius's a classic 1543 work on anatomy. So this book is now well over 400 years old, and you get a kind of an up-close personal encounter with it.
And we're discussing this particular book, and this frontispiece. What we're looking at is the frontispiece at the Vesalius book, which is a very programmatic image, and we discussed this extensively in one of the lectures, and even more extensively in one of the medical humanities seminars. And in fact, usually both the visit to the John Rylands Library is a shared visit for the students on the HSTM and the medical humanities pathways. So we try to bring the students together for these.
Yeah, they're actually there at the moment.
They're there at the moment.
Yes. So that's a nice example of how the approach works. So a lot of this is shared. You will have that exposure on both of the programs. On the HSTM program, you'll see more of the wider historical context of the knowledge cultures, including what was going on in what became the physical sciences. On the medical humanities program, you'll think more about it as an artistic object and how you can bring in your own.
Well, to use this as an example, we'll think about it as an artistic object, but also as an image which we can use to explore the role of dissection in the history of medicine, because that's what's going on. There's a dissection, the body of a convict being dissected at the center of this image. So we use this as the launch pad for a discussion of the role of anatomy and dissection in medicine.
Okay, this is a trip to the herbarium of the Manchester Museum. Anybody been to the herbarium? You have, excellent. A lot of people don't know that there is such a thing. There used to be very, very important research resources, these huge collections of dried plant specimens, because that was really the only way that you could compare these things in the days before sort of mass digital data. There had to be these big physical repositories of specimens like this. And this one still survives. It's very big. I think it's the 4th largest in the country, and it's still a part of the museum's activities. And so we take people up there and we show them how it operated, how the cataloguing system worked, and so forth. And we also talk to the staff, one of whom is pictured there, about their work and how they try to get an audience, how they try to get a public audience for a project like a herbarium, which is slightly unfamiliar to most of today's, even professional scientists. You know, they wouldn't necessarily think in terms of these sort of big collections of physical specimens. So that's quite useful for the connections into the SciCon program as well. How, for instance, so that the herbarium has a blog and it has a Twitter feed, and how it manages to keep a public audience going in the 21st century. This slightly gloomy looking slide is a trip to one of the stores at the Science and Industry Museum up at Castlefield, which we also work with quite closely. We've got a very good working research relationship with them. 2 of our current PhD students are working on collaborative projects with them about their collections. So this is something we like to do right at the beginning of the course, just to familiarise you with the environment. We go around and we look at some of the collections, and as far as possible we get people to take us behind the scenes, because there's always a lot of stuff that's not on public display in museums, and we talk about the work of collecting and cataloguing and conserving it, and how objects in particular can be used as research resources for historians and other researchers. That's something that kind of unites, if you check your Venn diagram, kind of unites the 3 programs. It's there in the middle for all of them. So, I mean, the historical stuff, it's got all the stuff you would expect in terms of how to work with archives, how to work with published resources and so forth. The object studies is a little bit of a local specialism. And this is something that happened over the summer. This is one of last year's HSTM master's students, Anne-Caroline, and she, with 2 of her fellow students, developed a public engagement activity based on museum objects. So these are from the Museum of Medicine and Health, which Carsten can tell you a bit more about.
Well, the Museum of Medicine and Health is a collection which we have taken the academic lead role for, and it's a collection of medical objects, not anatomical specimens, but a lot of other objects that are related to the history of medicine. One example are doctor's bags, like the one that Anne-Caroline has in front of her. It's currently stowed away in a room in the back of the Stopford building, and selected objects are taken out for occasions like this one, but they can also form the focus of projects and activities, and that's why it's interesting for us, because we have access to this and we can handle those objects.
Mm-hmm. And they do quite a lot of work with museums, museology students, using this collection as a resource for getting things out to public audiences. And our students have worked on similar things. And of course, they're sharing an office and they're sharing some courses with the science communication students. So there's plenty of opportunities for comparing notes on ways to bring this material, including historical stories, to a wider audience. And some of the current students are developing a magazine at the moment, a science magazine, a new science magazine from Manchester, with the wonderful title of Planet B, which is going to have its first issue at some time, I think, in the next few months. And that's actually a registered student society. So it's across the whole of the university, and with some people from Manchester Metropolitan University as well. But it's kind of headquartered here at Chisholm at the moment. So, this is what the two programs look like. You can see they are both the same shape. They've got slightly different combinations of things, but they follow the same schedule. This is the full-time version. The full-time version takes 1 year. A master's, unlike an undergraduate year, runs 12 months. So it runs September to September. It's divided up into credit blocks in a way that those of you who studied undergrad here will be familiar with, except you have 180 credits rather than 120. So a third of your time, 60 credits, is spent on semester 1, that's September to January. A third of your time, semester 2, February to May, and then a third of your time on your independent research project, your dissertation, May to September. Okay, and the idea is you start off with some fairly wide-ranging required courses, and then you gradually specialise. So you do optional courses closer to your particular interests in the second semester, and then you work on your much more specialised dissertation. So the HSTM programme has a course called Major Themes, which is a very wide-ranging survey course. Starts in the 16th century, comes through to today. I've got a copy of this for everyone, if you'd like one. This is the course outline. We also have a course on historiography, the writing of history, and the different approaches that have been taken to the writing of history over time. And there's a course called Communicating Ideas. That's the only course which the whole of it is taken by all of our students and the science communication students as well. And that is about general skills in how to do research, how to read material quickly and effectively, how to prioritise it, how to write about it, how to summarise it, how to deal with different audiences when you're writing and also when you're speaking. And we go into issues that will be of more direct relevance to the psychon people as well, like what happens in television, video productions, this kind of material. But it's all stuff that is useful to know these days. Carsten, do you want to say something about semester 1?
Semester 1, in semester 1, well, also in semester 2, the medical humanities students share quite a lot of the activities with the HSTM students. For example, we cunningly divided a timetable, the major themes lectures, so that all the history of medicine lectures are at the same time on a Monday morning. So the history of medicine lectures will be delivered for both student cohorts, while the history of physical science and chemistry, anything that's not history of medicine, will deliver it only to the history of science, technology, and medicine students. So this is the lecture component of the major themes in medical humanities, which parallels the major themes in history of science, technology, and medicine. The other part of major themes in medical humanities is a 2-hour seminar, which is organized around readings that are generally topical. So, for example, we have in association with the lecture on Vesalius, we have a 2-hour seminar that deals with dissection, and for which students read a range of articles from different genres of writing, for lack of a better expression. They read a sociological piece, a historical piece, and fiction and poetry, and we then go through these various genres and work out whether there are places with association in regards to that topic that the historian can't reach, the sociologist can't reach, but maybe that fictional literature can get to. So you can see there is a lot of history in there. There's a lot of social science in there, but in addition, we move into creative approaches. And the unit that the HSTM students don't do is the creative approaches to medical humanities, which is one where students get working on those creative approaches in association with a whole range of arts practitioners, but also colleagues in the medical school which have an interest and a portfolio of activities in those arts approaches. Another difference in the in semester 2 is that while students do the medicine, science, and modernity module, which also is usually taken by most of the history of science, technology, and medicine students, and they're encouraged to assemble the remaining 30 credits elsewhere in the university with units that are chosen with a view to their final project. The final project in this case does not have to be a research dissertation. It can be. Medical humanities students can choose to do a historical dissertation or a social science oriented dissertation. In reality though, many of the students choose the other option to do a creative portfolio. So they do an arts project with an academic, with a scholarly commentary, which makes it, which turns it into a dissertation. So, for example, last year we had one student who is very interested in music and and is a musician, and she took her option units in semester 2 in music, and she did a project on music for waiting rooms, where she composed a suite of music for waiting rooms, ambient music, not very, it doesn't interfere with the environment very much. She did some research for this, she evaluated it, and she implemented it in a hospital waiting room in collaboration with the charity in London. So that's an example of the kind of projects that are possible. Another project was by a student who is interested in becoming a cosmetic surgeon, and she did a project on facial reconstruction, where she also looked at visual representations, experimented with various visual methods, and wrote a partly historical, partly reflective commentary on this. And you can, if you're interested, you can look at some of this work on the website of the Medical Humanities Laboratory. There we go. And on there is a tab, there's a category on, well, there's music for waiting room. It's the most recent post. There is a category, students reflect on medical humanities. And if I could see the cursor, here we go. Students reflect on medical humanities, and music for waiting rooms is the most recent one. If you go there, you can listen to the music, but you can also look at some older projects if you scroll down further. And those are the main differences between HSTM and medical humanities.
Okay, so just to run quickly through those semester 2 options.
Oh, you haven't done semester 2, have you?
I always forget to do this. Sorry to part-timers. This is what the part-time structure looks like. As you can see, it's all the same courses, run over 2 years instead of 1. So at any given time, you're doing half the full-time load. And so you do, for HSTM, you do the major themes first of all, then one of the semester 2 options, then you have the vacation, then you come back and you do the other 2 semester 1 courses, then the other option, and then you finish off your research dissertation in your second vacation. So, the option courses. So we have one called Shaping the Sciences. That one deals with the question, where did scientific disciplines come from and how do they negotiate their status relationships? So questions like, why is there this thing called physics? Okay, which there wasn't until really the middle of the 19th century. Isaac Newton never heard the word physicist. He wouldn't have thought of himself in those terms. That identity came from a particular place for a particular reason. Why did scientists take so much longer to professionalize than engineers or medics, physicians and surgeons? Why is it that people used to look at physics and the physical sciences as being the top sciences, the dominant sciences, and used to think of the life sciences as being lower status, a bit messier, a bit woollier, whereas now, if anything, the reverse is true. How did the life sciences get to become so important? What have been the consequences of the biosciences taking the informatic turn with the rise of DNA and genetics concepts? Why is it that so many scientists these days spend so much of their time fiddling around in statistics packages rather than cutting frogs open? That kind of question. What difference did the Second World War make? Did the coming of the atomic bomb and the success of the project that created it really reshape expectations about what science could do for the state? All of these questions on that course. We also have a course called Making Modern Technology, which is the one that I run in semester 2. This one's really concerned with very big and visible technologies and very invisible technologies. So we talk about the technologies that define people's notions of high tech, things like ships, skyscrapers, gigantic dams, space shuttles, that kind of thing. But we also talk about things like the good old internet connection here. Okay, which is, it's successful because we've forgotten that it's there. The only time we notice it is when it goes wrong. But the fact that that is a connection to the internet as defined by various private constructors working for the United States government some decades ago, rather than any other networking system, actually defines a lot about the online world today. So we go through and trace those connections and make the invisible things visible. And the other course, Medicine, Science and Modernity. Carsten, you're probably better.
It's a reading-based course. While the lectures in the first semester covered everything from antiquity to modernity, this homes in on medicine since 1800 and the topics that made medicine what it is today. We look at the different institutions. For example, the laboratory, the hospital. We look at colonial and post-colonial medicine, and we look at medical science, and we look at the history of modern medicine in this course.
Okay. And it is usually, if there are no timetable clashes, it is possible instead to do some of the courses that Elizabeth will be talking about for the Science Communication programme. It is also possible to do humanities units from outside the centre, so maybe units that the History MA offers. Elizabeth?
We should also point out that it's very common for students to audit or just attend lots of other units simply to keep up and see what's going on, but not take them for credit. And the way that we schedule our units across all three programs makes it possible for you to audit anything, not simply take it for credit.
Yeah, the rule we have is if there isn't a timetable clash, sometimes there is, but if there isn't, then you can go to anything. Okay? And you can go along to a course if you're not taking the assessments for it. You don't have to do the work. That's fine. Yes?
And another note about scheduling, particularly in the first semester, but also in the first semester we tried very hard to have our courses front-loaded onto a few days during the week, so that even if you're doing the course full-time, you can still maintain a paid job on the side, as we know that many of our students do that. We usually have the dates prepared for the spring courses well in advance in the autumn, so that you're able to plan your work schedule in the spring if you're, again, holding a job alongside your degree work.
Yeah, so a full-time student usually has to attend 3 days or maybe sometimes 2 days per week. A part-time student, it will be 2 days or 1 day a week. Okay. Right, and so as I was saying, you can attend by special arrangement, you can attend things from outside Chisholm. On medical humanities, that's what people usually do. Yeah. Okay, so often things from art history and visual studies, or occasionally drama.
English and American literature, drama quite commonly, yes, screen studies.
Okay, and finally, this is a list of the dissertations that last year's HSTM students submitted. As you can see, we've got quite a lot of medical or healthcare focused stuff there. That's not unusual, and the focus is mostly in the 20th century, which is also not unusual. But if you want to go earlier, or if you want to go into the physical sciences or engineering or something like that, that is generally possible. So we have, for instance, we had a project from a guy with an engineering background, actually, who was working on the architecture of a particular generation of universities in this country, the ones that were built mostly in the 1950s and 60s, and how the technologies behind that, like new concrete modular design systems, influence that process. I've just made it sound like the most boring dissertation in the world. It wasn't. It was really interesting. If you could see the photographs, you get what I was on about there. We actually had 2 projects about buildings. The other one was about Stopford Building, which is probably known and loved by a couple of you. The building that contains this university's medical school, which was built in the 70s, why it ended up the way it did, which is certainly a bit of a research question, if you've been inside it. We had a really interesting one about the radical science movement in the 1970s. People who were very politically engaged, mostly from the left, trying to use science as a way to renegotiate power relations in society, and how they treated women. And the answer was very often not as well as you would expect. A lot of the women who were associated with that movement, who were active in that movement, actually got quite annoyed at what they saw as the hypocrisy of a lot of the men leading the movement, and made those views known in the way that activists do. And so there's some really interesting literature there. And there's one that I supervised about initial responses to the Telegraph. This is from a student called Alex, who is now working on a PhD with me. So he did this 19th century project. His PhD is actually about the internet Okay, so a completely different time period, but he's using similar analytical concepts about a new technology of communication comes along, how do people respond to it? Okay, anything to add there?
I've talked about the creative portfolios already. That would have been my contribution at this point.
Okay, I think we should bring Gemma up to the front because she's been sitting rather patiently waiting. So those of you who were on the museum tour, you've already met Gemma. If you want to sit there so that you're in the shots. Thank you. So Gemma, you're currently doing a PhD with us, but a couple of years ago you did the Masters in HSTM as a full-timer. Would you recommend it? Please say yes, please.
It's really funny if I said no now. Yes, it was a lot of fun. I definitely recommend doing it. It's a really interesting course because it's not just kind of looking at history. You get to look at kind of, it's very specialised and often kind of very, sometimes feels a bit random sometimes, but like in a really good way. Like I get to look at medicinal plants in 20th century pharmacy. I'm not sure in any other context I'd be able to randomly look at plants in the 20th century pharmacy. So it's a really interesting course. To look at lots of different aspects of history and also different representations of science in different contexts that you'd never necessarily otherwise look at. Kind of going on to what Elizabeth was saying before, what I really loved about the Manchester course was that you can go and audit other classes. So I audited lots of the museum stuff because I love museums, as anyone who went on the history tour earlier would know. I very much love the Manchester Museum. But it's a really good way to kind of engage beyond simply kind of an area you're interested in. So if you are, say, doing history of science or the medical humanities one, you can still kind of go, oh, I'm interested in museums, or I'm interested in medicine or history or whatever, and get to still kind of do other classes, which is really good. Yeah, sorry.
Do you want to say something? I mean, you joined us from after biology degree. Do you want to say, in your cohort, were there mostly students with science background, or did you have humanities students in your master's student cohort?
So in my master's cohort, we had someone from medicine. Then two of us were from biology related degrees. And then we had one history person as well, and also we had two part-timers as well. Both, I believe, came from a history background, from what I remember. But yeah, so it's kind of very diverse backgrounds for going into it, and the way the course is structured is really good because by the end of it, at the start you may go, oh, I don't know, I know, me coming and going, I don't know anything about how to write history, how am I going to do this? And then by the end of it, you kind of are able to write history, so it's kind of a good way of improving your writing style, and it does change as you go. You kind of start off kind of with lots of smaller essays, and the essays get bigger as you go along, which is a really useful way of doing it. You don't suddenly at the beginning go write 10,000 words on something. You can start with smaller ones and build up, which is really good.
So what was your dissertation about then?
So I looked at Materia Medica, which was an early kind of sort of pharmacy. So it was kind of plants, animals, minerals that we use for medicinal purposes, so kind of more kind of galenic medicines. So rather than using, say, active compounds or synthetic drugs, it's more kind of whole plants and stuff like that, making tinctures and things like that. And what my dissertation looked at was that course in the 19th century. So I looked at how changing etymology, so kind of changing terminology, impacted how the course was taught and structured, and specialisation kind of tied into this because you had pharmacy kind of separating out into different disciplines and meaning different things compared to what it meant at the beginning of the 19th century. And also it kind of incorporated the Manchester Museum collection as well, because I also looked at how the talk was taught specifically Manchester compared to Guy's, but also part of that while looking at the Materia Medica collection, looking at how collections related to education. So it's kind of lots of different themes tied up into our group project, really.
What advice would you give to people who were starting the project or starting the programme overall, knowing what you know now?
Yeah, so going in, be prepared to read a lot. There is a lot of reading, but it's one of those things that you often find things that you're really interested in. Some subjects like you find more interesting than others, like everyone has an area that you're interested in more than others. And there is lots of extra reading, which if you're interested in something, it's a good way to start deciding what you want to do your project on. It's just that maybe if you've got 7-hour readings and you find the seminar particularly interesting, like something like recommended readings, going and doing them is quite useful. And then for the dissertation, I recommend starting a lot earlier than kind of like, not so much more like reading around the topic to kind of give you ideas of where you want to go and kind of where your research would fit in with what's already kind of been written. So if you read lots, it kind of helps. But yeah, and being prepared to kind of, especially with the dissertation, kind of prepared to read a lot and then try and write and give you enough time to edit, because I find like I end up finishing with a month to edit, which drove me a bit crazy because I hate editing, but it was really useful because by the end, what I'd finished by the end of the editing process was very different to what I started at the beginning of the editing process, and the editing process really helps to kind of improve your writing. So yeah, I often say, give yourself lots of editing time for everything, and often try and aim for earlier than the deadline. That gives you time to then edit and play with it.
That's part of the aim of the course, is to teach those skills, not just of how to write, but of how to edit, how to project manage, and so forth. Right, I'm going to stop the recording in a moment because you probably don't all want your questions recorded. I come in. But those of you who are watching this on the video, if you've got any questions or you would like us to put you in touch with one of our current or former students, such as Gemma, all the contact details are on the website. And thank you very much. There'll be a separate recording for the Science Communication programme. Thank you.